The distress signal from the Eternal Dawn reached the Galactic Council's emergency relay at 3:17 hours, and by 3:19 it had been logged, categorized, assigned a priority level, and placed in a queue behind 41 other emergency requests from across the inhabited sectors. Because that was how the Council's emergency response system worked, had worked for 800 years, and would continue to work long after everyone aboard the Eternal Dawn was dead. Commander Vale knew none of this when he sent the signal. He knew only what his instruments told him, which was that his ship was tumbling through the Sector 7 void at an angle that made navigation impossible, that the engine explosion 11 minutes ago had taken out primary and secondary propulsion simultaneously, in a configuration his chief engineer described as statistically almost impossible and practically catastrophic, and that the life support systems were running on emergency reserve power that would sustain 1,200 passengers and crew for exactly 5 hours and 43 minutes before the oxygen levels dropped below the threshold that sustained consciousness, and approximately 40 minutes after that before they dropped below the threshold that sustained life. 5 hours and 43 minutes. He had been a deep space commander for 22 years. He had navigated the Veth corridor during the solar storm of Cycle 447. He had brought a damaged ship through the debris field at Korath Station with half his navigation systems offline. He had, in the long professional biography of his career, faced situations that his superiors had later described as unrecoverable and recovered from them. He had never faced 5 hours and 43 minutes before. "Council response," he said, not turning from the viewport where the stars tumbled past in the slow, nauseating rotation of a ship that had lost its ability to hold position. "Logged and queued," said his communications officer, a young Sauran named Preth whose voice had the specific quality of someone delivering information they wished they did not have to deliver. "Estimated response time based on current queue position, 19 hours minimum." Vale said nothing. He did not need to say anything. Everyone on the bridge understood the mathematics. 19 hours, 5 hours and 43 minutes. The gap between those two numbers was not a problem to be solved. It was a sentence. "Nearest cooperative fleet." 17 hours, sir. They're already moving. They received our signal, but 17 hours. "Independent rescue services." Preth checked his console. 2 within range. The Marin emergency response is 12 hours out. The Velhari Rescue Coalition is 14. Vale turned from the viewport. He looked at his bridge crew, 16 beings, each of whom had a life outside this ship, people who were waiting for them somewhere, a world that would receive a notification in a few days that said something clinical and insufficient about the nature of what had happened in the Sector 7 void. He looked at the passenger manifest on the secondary display. 1,200 names, 1,200 lives, families on their way to colony worlds, or returning from visits to home systems, or simply moving through the galaxy on the ordinary business of living that had brought them to this ship on this day. 5 hours and 43 minutes. "Sir," Preth's voice had changed. Something in it that Vale couldn't immediately categorize, not alarm, not hope, something in between. "There is one more option. I didn't mention it because," he paused, and the pause contained something complicated. "I wasn't sure you would want to consider it." "Tell me." "Human emergency response," Preth said. "They have a signal relay in this sector. Their response protocol is," another pause, "different from standard cooperative emergency services." Vale looked at him. "How different?" "Their logged average response time for deep void distress signals in this sector is," Preth checked the figure twice, clearly not trusting it, 4 minutes, 11 seconds. The bridge was very quiet. 4 minutes, 11 seconds. Against 17 hours and 14 hours and 12 hours. Against the 19 hours that the Council had queued them behind 41 other emergencies, as though emergencies were the kind of thing that could be patiently processed in order. Vale knew about humans. Every deep space commander in the cooperative knew about humans, the species that had arrived in the galaxy 40 years ago with a fleet that shouldn't have existed, joined the cooperative with a data package that had kept the scientific community busy for a decade, and had since been doing things in the spaces between the inhabited systems that no one had fully mapped or understood. He knew about them the way one knew about a new neighbor who had moved in and immediately begun making changes to the building that everyone found surprising and no one had asked for, with a mixture of curiosity, faint suspicion, and the specific discomfort of encountering something that didn't fit the existing framework. He had never needed them before. He had never thought he would need them. His species, the Keth, had been navigating deep space since before humanity had left their home system, and the idea of sending a distress signal to a species that was, by any objective measure of civilizational age and technological history, his junior by several centuries, produced a feeling that he recognized, professionally, as irrational pride, and that he also recognized, professionally, as the kind of irrational pride that got people killed when the mathematics were as clear as they were right now. 5 hours and 41 minutes now. Send the signal, he said. Preth sended. 4 minutes and 8 seconds later, a voice came through the communications array, human, female, accented in the particular way of someone who had learned cooperative standard fluently, but not natively, carrying the specific quality of complete, unhurried calm that Vale would later spend considerable time thinking about. Eternal Dawn, this is Captain Alina Rourke of the human vessel Unyielding. We have your signal. We have your position. We are coming. Please confirm current life support status and passenger count. Vale picked up the channel himself. This is Commander Vale. 1,200 aboard, passengers and crew. Life support reserve at 5 hours 39 minutes. Engine systems offline, primary and secondary. We are tumbling at approximately 40 degrees per minute. We cannot stabilize without external assistance. A brief pause, not hesitation, but the specific pause of someone absorbing information and converting it immediately into action. Understood, Commander. We will be at your position in 11 minutes. Begin preparing your passengers for possible boarding, emergency evacuation protocols if you have them, improvised if you don't. We'll walk you through our process on approach. Another pause, smaller. You called the right frequency. We've got you. Vale set down the channel. He looked at Preth. Preth looked back at him with the expression of someone who had just watched a mathematical impossibility resolve itself into a fact. 11 minutes, Preth said. 11 minutes, Vale confirmed. He turned back to the viewport, where the stars continued their slow tumble, and thought about 4 minutes and 8 seconds, and about what it meant that a ship had been close enough to arrive in 11 minutes, which meant it had been in the sector already, positioned somewhere in the dark, waiting for exactly this kind of signal, and about the specific, quiet quality of Captain Rourke's voice when she said, "We've got you," which was not the voice of someone saying something reassuring. It was the voice of someone stating a fact. He had 11 minutes to figure out what he was going to do with that. Warlord Gret received the distress signal from the Eternal Dawn at 3:18 hours, 1 minute after it was broadcast, because the Vrax intercept array that his fleet carried had been specifically calibrated to pick up cooperative emergency frequencies before the cooperative's own relay system processed them. This was, in Gret's considered professional opinion, the single most valuable piece of technology his empire possessed. Not the weapons, not the drives, not the 3 generations of military engineering that had gone into building the 40 ships currently moving through the Sector 7 approaches under his command. The intercept array. Because the weapons and the drives and the engineering were what you used after you arrived. The intercept array was what made sure you arrived first. He had been doing this for 19 years. The calculus was simple and had never failed. A stranded ship in deep space had no defenses, no ability to maneuver, and a finite window of survival. The cooperative's emergency response was slow, bureaucratic, queued, procedural, exactly the kind of response that an organization designed around consensus and process produced when immediacy was required. Gret arrived before the cooperative. Gret offered, through his intercepted knowledge of the distress signal, the impression of a rescue. The stranded ship's crew, desperate and grateful, allowed approach. And then the impression dissolved, and what remained was 40 Vrax warships and a cargo hold with space for 1,200 more. 847 beings in his current inventory. Various species, various origins, various utility ratings for the labor markets of the outer systems, where certain categories of work were performed by certain categories of beings who had not chosen to perform them. He was 3 good hauls away from the kind of number that made a being in his profession genuinely comfortable. The Eternal Dawn was a Keth passenger vessel. 1,200 aboard, the signal had given him the count. Keth were valued highly in the outer system markets. They were large, physically capable, and had a reputation for endurance that made them useful for the kind of labor that wore out less durable species. 1,200 Keth would be the best single haul of his career. "Set course," he told his navigation officer. "Maximum speed. I want to be at the Eternal Dawn's position before anything else in this sector knows they've called for help." "Sir," said his communications officer, a scarred Vrax veteran named Tav who had served under Gret for 11 years and whose judgment Gret trusted absolutely. "There's a secondary signal in the intercept." He paused. "Human emergency response frequency. Someone on the Eternal Dawn sent to the human network." Gret turned to look at him. "Humans." "Yes, sir." Gret was quiet for a moment. He knew about humans. Everyone in the outer systems knew about humans, the new species that had arrived 40 years ago and had since been inserting themselves into corners of the galaxy where they had not previously existed. He had encountered their ships twice in his career. Both times the encounters had been brief and without incident. Human vessels tended to be small, fast, and crewed by beings who looked at his fleet with the specific, flat expression of beings who were assessing him, and had not yet decided what they were going to do about him. He had not found this particularly alarming at the time. He found it slightly more notable now, in the context of a distress signal in a sector where humans apparently maintained a response relay. "How long until a human ship could reach the Eternal Dawn?" he asked Tav. Tav checked the intercept data. Based on their relay position, approximately 11 minutes. "And we are 23 minutes at current speed." 12 minutes. He would arrive 12 minutes after whatever human response came. This was, in the abstract, a complication. In practice, it was a matter of scale. His fleet was 40 warships. Whatever human vessel responded to an emergency signal would be, by definition, a rescue ship, not a warship. And a rescue ship, however fast, against 40 Vrax warships was not a complication. It was an inconvenience. "Maintain course and speed," he said. "When we arrive, take the human ship first, then secure the Eternal Dawn, standard procedure." "Yes, sir." He turned back to his tactical display and watched the distance to the Eternal Dawn count down. 19 years, 847 in inventory, 1,200 more in 12 minutes. He thought about comfort and about the outer system markets and about the specific mathematics of a career that had never, not once in 19 years, failed to produce the outcome he had calculated. He did not think about humans again for another 20 minutes. This was the last significant mistake of his life. The Unyielding dropped out of its transit 11 minutes and 4 seconds after Captain Rourke had made contact with the Eternal Dawn, and it arrived at the position Vale's signal had broadcast with a precision that his navigation officer, watching through the external feeds, would later describe to anyone who would listen as the single most exact piece of spatial calculation she had ever observed from a ship she hadn't built. But it was not the precision of the arrival that made the bridge of the eternal dawn go silent. It was what arrived with it. Commander Vale had been expecting a rescue ship, something functional, capable, crewed by beings who knew what they were doing. He had revised his expectations upward from the modest baseline he'd started with, given the response time, but he had still been expecting something in the category of rescue vessel. A ship with medical facilities and boarding tubes, and the specific functional design of something built to extract beings from damaged ships and transport them to safety. The Unyielding was 600 meters long. Its hull was the flat, non-reflective black of a ship that did not want to be seen until it chose to be seen. Its weapons arrays, and they were visible, unambiguously, unmistakably weapons arrays, were the kind that did not belong on rescue vessels under any standard cooperative classification. And it was not alone. They came out of the dark one by one, at intervals of approximately 8 seconds, emerging from transit at positions that surrounded the eternal dawn in a pattern that Vale's tactical officer, who had studied fleet maneuvers at the Cooperative Academy and had graduated in the top percentile of her class, identified, in a voice that had gone very quiet, as a defensive formation. Not an encirclement, a shield. 12 ships, positioned to put the eternal dawn at the center of a geometry that placed something capable of responding to a threat between the damaged vessel and every possible approach vector. 12 ships, plus the Unyielding, 13 human vessels deployed around his crippled ship in the time it had taken him to organize his passengers for possible boarding. Commander Vale, Rourke's voice on the channel again, the same unhurried calm. We're in position. We're going to begin stabilizing your ship's rotation first. You'll feel it in about 90 seconds. Don't be alarmed by the contact. We're using tethering lines on the port and starboard sections. Once you're stable, we'll begin the boarding assessment and figure out whether we're doing a repair in place or a full evacuation. Vale found his voice. Captain Rourke. I was expecting, he stopped, because what he had been expecting and what was outside his viewport were different enough that finishing the sentence required reorganizing his understanding of several things simultaneously. One ship. Rourke's voice carried something that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. Commander, when someone sends a signal on our frequency, they're telling us they're in trouble and they need help and everything else has either failed or isn't fast enough. We take that seriously. A brief pause. We always come with enough to make sure we can actually help. 13 ships, Vale said. He wasn't sure why he said it. The number simply needed to be spoken. 13 ships, Rourke confirmed. You have 1,200 people aboard. 13 ships is what 1,200 people need. She paused again, and this time the pause was different, purposeful, as though she was giving him time to absorb something before adding the next piece. Commander, I need to tell you something because you need to know it before the next 20 minutes happen. We intercepted a secondary signal when we arrived on approach. Vrak's fleet. 40 vessels. They picked up your distress signal before the Council relay processed it. They use an intercept array, standard practice for their operation. They're 23 minutes out from your position. Vale's hand tightened on the edge of his command console. I know about the Vrak's operation, Rourke said, and now the calm had a different quality, not reassuring but settled, the calm of someone who had already processed this information and made the decisions it required. 847 beings in current inventory by our last intelligence count. They've been working this sector for 19 years. They arrive before the rescue, they pose as rescue, and then they're not. A pause. They're not going to do that today. I want you to keep your passengers calm and your crew focused on the boarding prep. We're going to handle the Vraks. 13 ships against 40, Vale said. Yes, Rourke said simply. Captain. Commander Vale. Her voice was still calm, still settled, still carrying the specific quality that he had been trying to identify since the first transmission and that he now, finally, understood. It was the voice of someone who had already been in this situation, not this specific situation, but the shape of it. The essential structure of it, and who knew, not from confidence or bravado, but from the accumulated weight of times they had been here before, exactly what was going to happen next. We answered your signal. That means we see this through, all the way through. A pause. Humanity always answers. That's not something we say, it's something we do. He felt the first contact of the tethering lines on his ship's hull, a gentle pressure, then a steady pull, the slow cessation of the tumbling that had been his entire physical world for the past 40 minutes. The stars outside his viewport stopped spinning. Held. The eternal dawn was still. For the first time in 40 minutes, the ship was still. "Thank you," he said. The word felt insufficient. "Get your people ready to move if we need to move them," Rourke said. "We'll let you know." She cut to her tactical channel, and Vale stood in the suddenly still bridge of his ship and watched through the external feeds as 13 human vessels took their positions between the eternal dawn and the direction from which, in approximately 20 minutes, 40 Vrax warships were going to arrive. He had no idea what was going to happen. He had no framework for what he was watching, but he found, standing in the stillness that the human ships had given back to him, that he believed her. All the way through. Gret saw the human ships at 17 minutes, 6 minutes before his projected arrival, because his fleet was pushing past rated speed and eating the gap faster than his initial calculation. He saw them on his tactical display first, 13 contacts arranged around the eternal dawn, in a formation that his tactical officer spent 30 seconds analyzing before delivering his assessment. "Defensive," the officer said. "They're not positioned for attack. They're positioned to make any approach to the eternal dawn go through them first." Gret looked at the display. 13 contacts. He had 40 ships. The math was still the same math it had been when he'd heard about the human response, favorable, straightforwardly, by a ratio that in any conventional engagement would make the outcome a foregone conclusion. "Weapons profile?" he asked. His tactical officer took longer this time. "Unknown, sir. The hull configuration doesn't match any human vessel class in our database. The energy signatures are..." A pause. "I'm having difficulty categorizing them. Some of the readings are outside our sensor array's standard interpretation range." "They're rescue ships," Gret said, patiently. He had been doing this for 19 years. His officers occasionally developed unnecessary alarm about variables that did not materially affect the outcome. Whatever their configuration, they responded to a distress signal. "They're not warships." "Sir," said Tav from the communications station, and his voice had the specific quality that made Gret look at him immediately, because Tav's voice almost never had that quality. "We're receiving a transmission from the lead human vessel, directed at us. Tight beam on our command frequency." Our command frequency. Not an open broadcast. Not a channel that a rescue ship would have access to. Their command frequency, which was encrypted and which no cooperative emergency service vessel should have been able to locate, let alone target a tight beam transmission at. "Put it through," Gret said. The voice that came through was female human, carrying a quality of calm that Gret found. In the 3 seconds he had to process it before the content of the transmission demanded his full attention, genuinely unsettling in a way he could not immediately articulate. "Warlord Gret, my name is Captain Alina Rourke. I'm going to be direct with you because directness serves both of us better than any alternative. You have 40 ships, we have 13. You've been doing this for 19 years and your fleet has never encountered meaningful resistance. I understand why the math looks favorable to you." A pause. "The math is wrong. I want you to know that before the next 10 minutes happen, because what happens in the next 10 minutes is going to be determined by the decision you make right now, and I want that decision to be made with accurate information." Gret looked at Tav. Tav's expression had not changed from the one that had made him look in the first place. "We are not a rescue fleet," Rourke continued. "We respond to distress signals because that's what we do, but the ships you are looking at on your tactical display are not configured for rescue only. I want you to run a full sensor sweep on our energy signatures right now, before you respond to me, and I want you to look carefully at what your sensors find, because whatever they're telling you they can't categorize, trust that. Your sensors are correct. They can't categorize what we're carrying, because you haven't seen it before. Gret turned to his tactical officer. Full sweep, everything. The sweep took 45 seconds. His tactical officer read the results in silence for approximately 10 of those seconds, and then turned to face Gret with an expression that 19 years of working together had not prepared Gret to interpret, because it was an expression his tactical officer had never worn before. "Sir," he said, "the energy configurations on the human vessels, I've run the readings 3 times. He paused. "I don't have a classification for them, but the power output on the lead vessel alone is—" He looked at the display, and then back at Gret. "Sir, it's reading higher than our entire fleet combined." The bridge was very quiet. 847 beings, Rourke's voice said from the open channel. "That's your current inventory count. We know because we've been watching you work this sector for 16 months. We know your intercept array frequency, your transit patterns, your approach vectors, your holding facility coordinates. We know everything about your operation, Warlord Gret, because that's something we do. We watch for what happens to people who send distress signals and don't get answered, and we track the people who make sure those signals go unanswered." A pause, and something shifted in the voice, not anger, which would have been easier to dismiss, but something colder and more specific. 847 people. Different species, different origins, different worlds. All of them sent distress signals at some point. All of them went unanswered. We have been building the record of your operation for 16 months. We have everything. Another pause. Today, you have a choice that none of those 847 people were given. You can stand down, reverse course, and we will follow you peacefully to the location of your holding facility, and every being you have in inventory will be released, and you will face a cooperative tribunal for 19 years of what you've done. That is the path where you survive this. Her voice was completely even. The other path is the one where you look at the math, decide 40 is more than 13, and find out what our energy signatures actually mean. A pause that lasted exactly long enough. Humanity always answers, Warlord. We answered the eternal dawn. We've been answering everyone you've silenced for 16 months. You're the last thing on that list. Silence on the bridge. 40 Vrax warships. 13 human vessels. 19 years of a career that had never produced this moment, this transmission, this tactical officer's expression. Gret looked at the display, at the 13 ships, at the energy readings that his sensors could not categorize, running higher than his entire fleet combined on the lead vessel alone. "She's bluffing," he said. He said it because it needed to be said, because someone on the bridge needed to say it, because if no one said it, then the alternative was to accept what the sensor readings and the tactical officer's expression and the voice on the channel were all saying simultaneously. And 19 years of success was a difficult thing to put down. Tav said nothing. His tactical officer said nothing. Around the bridge, his crew said nothing. Gret looked at the display for a long time. Then he said, "Open a channel to the human ship." Rourke answered immediately, which told him she had been waiting. "Captain," he said, "I want to discuss terms." "There's one term," she said. "Stand down and lead us to your holding facility. That's the complete list. And if I do this, if I cooperate." "You survive," she said, "and the 847 people in your inventory survive. And we stop here instead of spending the next 6 months doing to the rest of your operation what we will do to it anyway, just faster, with you cooperating instead of not." A pause. "Those are good terms, Warlord. Better than you've given anyone in 19 years. He sat with that for a moment. With 19 years, with 847, with the sensor readings his tactical officer had read 3 times and still couldn't categorize. "Stand down," he said to his fleet. "Then to the channel. We'll lead you to the facility." "We'll be right behind you," Rourke said. And there was something in her voice now, not satisfaction, not triumph, something quieter and more final, like a door closing on something that had been open too long. All the way. The convoy, 40 Vrax warships leading, 13 human vessels following, the eternal dawn under tow at the center, moved through the Sector 7 void toward the coordinates Gret's navigator was transmitting. And on the bridge of the Unyielding, Captain Alina Rourke stood at the forward display and watched the stars move past, and thought about a holding facility that contained 847 beings who had sent distress signals that had gone unanswered, and about the 16 months it had taken to build the record, and about the specific, cold satisfaction of a door finally closing. Her communications officer, Lieutenant Yoon, came to stand beside her. He had been with her for 6 years. He knew, without being told, what she was thinking about. "We got them," he said. "We got them," she confirmed. "All of them." She paused. "Both groups." He nodded. He understood she meant the 1,200 on the Eternal Dawn and the 847 in the facility. 2 groups, same mission. "Captain," he said after a moment, "the Galactic Council observer is requesting a channel, Admiral Koss." Admiral Koss, who had been monitoring the situation. The Council had been monitoring everything, she knew, from the moment her fleet had arrived, and who had, in the emergency session that she'd been briefed on through the command channel, reportedly described the human deployment as an unauthorized unilateral action in a cooperative jurisdiction that required immediate explanation. She picked up the channel, "Admiral Koss." "Captain Rourke." His voice carried the specific quality of a being who had prepared several versions of this conversation and was choosing between them in real time. "The Council has been observing your operation. The Council wants to understand what we witnessed today. The fleet deployment, the intercept of the Vrax communication frequency, the technology readings our observers recorded from your vessels." He paused. "We want to understand what humans have been doing in Sector 7. "We've been watching," Rourke said simply, "for the beings who send signals and don't get answered." "For 16 months, Koss said, "without informing the Council." "Yes." "That is, Captain, that is not how the cooperative operates. There are protocols, authorization requirements, jurisdictional frameworks." "Admiral Koss," she said, not interrupting, exactly waiting for a pause and stepping into it. "In the 16 months we've been watching Sector 7, the Vrax operation intercepted 41 distress signals. Of those 41, 37 were processed through the Council's emergency queue at an average response time of 11 hours. The average human survival window in a deep void emergency is between 4 and 7 hours. She paused, letting him do the mathematics. "We answered all 41. The Council's queue answered the 4 that we declined in order to let the process work as a control sample." Another pause. "All 4 were lost." The channel was silent. "I'm not criticizing the Council," she said. "The Council processes thousands of emergencies across hundreds of sectors, and the system works for most of them. But in deep void emergencies, the system's timeline is incompatible with human survival windows. We identified that 18 months ago. We built a response infrastructure to address it. And today, that infrastructure answered a signal from a Keth passenger vessel with 1,200 aboard and simultaneously identified and neutralized a predatory operation that has been exploiting the gap between distress signals and cooperative response times for 19 years. She paused one final time. "I think that's a reasonable day's work, Admiral. The full documentation, relay station locations, Vrax intercept analysis, 16 months of sector observation data, will transfer it to the Council's records today. Everything. Transparent and complete." A long silence on the channel. "The beings in the Vrax holding facility," Koss said finally, and his voice had changed, something taken out of it that had been there before. 847. We'll have them out within 6 hours of reaching the facility, Rourke said. Medical teams are already briefed. Species-appropriate care protocols for all 47 species represented in the inventory count. Another silence, longer this time. Captain Rourke, Koss said. The council wants to formally acknowledge, he stopped, started again. What would you need from the council going forward? For the response infrastructure, for the sector monitoring? He paused once more, and when he continued, the specific quality in his voice was one that Rourke recognized as a being putting down something they had been carrying for a while. For doing this the right way. She thought about it for a moment. Recognition, she said. Formal acknowledgement that the Human Emergency Response Network operates in cooperative jurisdictions with council awareness, not council control awareness. We operate faster than the authorization process allows for, and speed is the variable that determines whether people live or die in deep void emergencies. But we don't want to be invisible. Invisible things make people nervous, and rightfully so. A pause. We want to be partners. That's all we've ever wanted. Koss was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'll bring it to the full council. I want you to know personally that what I observed today changes my understanding of something I thought I understood. He paused. I thought I understood what humanity was bringing to the cooperative. I was working from an incomplete picture. Most people are, Rourke said, not unkindly. We're still new. There's a lot that hasn't been visible yet. She paused. It will be. She closed the channel and looked at the stars, and the convoy moving through them, and thought about 6 hours and 847 people, and the 16 months of quiet, patient, invisible work that had made today possible. Captain, Yoon again. Commander Vale is requesting a channel personal. She picked it up. Commander. Captain Rourke. Vale's voice composed, measured, carrying the specific weight of a being who had spent the past 90 minutes revising his understanding of several things and had arrived at something he needed to say. I want to thank you for the response, for the stabilization, he paused, for what you did with the Vraks. We were already watching them, she said. Today just gave us the right moment. May I ask you something? Yes. The relay stations, he said, the infrastructure across the sector, the 16 months of observation, the fleet deployed in 13 minutes. A pause. Why, this sector is not human space. These are not human emergencies mostly. You are spending the resources involved in what I witnessed today must be, he stopped, searching for the word. Why do humans do this? She looked at the stars for a moment before answering. 6 years ago, she said, my daughter was on a research vessel in the Veth corridor, engine failure. The ship sent a distress signal. The council queue had it at 14 hours. The nearest independent service was 11 hours. Her survival window was 6. She paused. She sent 3 signals. I know because I've read the logs. 3 signals, each one a little different, each one trying a slightly different frequency or a slightly different format, the way people do when they're trying everything they can think of because the alternative is unacceptable. She paused again. No one came. Another pause, the longest. I made sure that doesn't happen again, to anyone, on any frequency, in any sector. She let that sit for a moment. That's why. The channel was quiet for a long time. I'm sorry, Vale said finally. The words were simple and insufficient and genuinely meant, and she recognized all 3 of those things simultaneously. Thank you, she said. And then, because it was true and because he had asked, and because the answer was the thing that had organized the past 6 years of her life into something with a shape. It matters less now, because of days like today. She closed the channel. The convoy continued. The stars moved past in the slow, steady way of things that had been there long before any of this and would be there long after, indifferent and permanent. Crossing the distances between worlds where beings sent signals into the dark and hoped that something would answer. The holding facility was in a debris field at the edge of the sector, disguised as an automated mining station, which was standard Vraks operational practice. and which the human intelligence team had identified 9 months ago, and had spent the subsequent 9 months documenting in the specific, thorough way of people who understood that documentation was the thing that made the difference between justice and revenge. Gret led them to it without deviation, because he had made his calculation and it had produced this outcome, and he was a being who followed the logic of his calculations even when he disliked where they led. The boarding teams went in at 8:47 hours. Medical teams first, species-appropriate protocols, care packages prepared for 47 different biologies, translators for 31 languages. Then the documentation teams, recording everything for the tribunal file that the Human Legal Division had been building for 16 months and would submit to the Cooperative Court of Justice within 72 hours of today. Rourke went in herself on the second wave. She walked through the facility with the same contained, methodical attention she brought to everything, recording, assessing, directing the evacuation flow. And she did not allow herself to feel the weight of what she was walking through until the work was done, and the last of the 847 was aboard a human medical vessel, and the facility was empty, and she was standing in a corridor that smelled of recycled air and the specific staleness of a place that had held people who did not want to be held. She stood in that corridor for perhaps 2 minutes, let the weight settle, let it be what it was. Then she turned and walked back out, because there was more work to do, and the work was what mattered, and the work was what she had. Vale met her in the docking bay of the Unyielding when the Eternal Dawn's tethering was complete, and his passengers had been assessed and cleared, and were resting in the human ship's generous medical bays under the care of staff who spoke, between them, enough languages to communicate basic comfort in most of the 37 species represented in the passenger manifest. He had been offered his own quarters to wait, something comfortable, private, appropriately calibrated for Keth environmental preferences, and had declined, and had waited in the docking bay instead because he needed to see her when she came back. She came back at 11:34 hours, and she looked exactly the same as she had sounded on every transmission, composed, settled, carrying nothing on her face that she hadn't chosen to put there. But there was something in the set of her shoulders, a fraction of something that he recognized from his own reflection on difficult days, that told him the corridor had cost her something, and that she had paid it because paying it was what the work required. 8:47, he said when she stopped in front of him, all of them out. All of them, she said. Medical evaluation underway. We'll have species-appropriate transportation arranged for everyone within 48 hours. He looked at her for a moment. Captain Rourke, I want to say something, and I want to say it directly because you were direct with me and I think you deserve the same. She waited. I almost didn't send the signal to your frequency, he said. I considered it and I almost didn't, because he stopped and made himself continue, because if he was going to say this, he was going to say all of it, because of pride. Because of what it would mean to a Keth commander of 22 years to need help from a species that has been among the stars for 40. Because in my mind you were, he stopped again. Lesser. That is the word I am using because it is the honest word. In my mind you were lesser. She said nothing. Her expression did not change. 11 minutes, he said. 13 ships. The Vrax operation that has been running in this sector for 19 years, dismantled in a morning. 847 people who sent signals that went unanswered going home. He held her gaze. I was wrong about what lesser means. Rourke was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Commander Vale, you sent the signal, that's what mattered. Not when, not after what consideration you sent it. Everything else followed from that. She paused. That's how it always works. Someone sends a signal, we come. The rest is details. He absorbed this. Humanity always answers, he said, not quoting her, understanding her. Yes, she said. That is not something we say, it is something we do. He nodded slowly. I know that now, he paused. I will make sure others know it. She held out her hand. the human gesture of agreement and good faith and mutual respect that the cooperative's diplomatic community had learned over 40 years of working with humanity, and that he had studied in briefings but never received personally. He took it. Her grip was direct and brief and completely genuine, which was, he was beginning to understand, the only way she knew how to be. "Safe travels, Commander," she said. "We'll have your ship's engine systems assessed and repaired within 12 hours. You'll be on your way before end of day." She turned and went back to her work, because there was more of it, and the work was what organized everything. And Captain Alina Rourke had not built the relay stations and the observation network and the response protocols and the 16 months of patient documentation out of anything except the knowledge that the work was what mattered, and that the work was never finished, and that as long as signals were being sent into the dark, somewhere in the dark, humans would be positioned to answer them. Admiral Koss brought the proposal to the full council 3 days later. He had spent the intervening time reading the documentation package that the human team had transferred, 16 months of sector observation, the complete VRAX operation file, the relay station network maps, the response time analysis, the control sample data from the 4 emergencies they had deliberately declined to answer. He had read all of it, in the order it had been compiled, and when he finished he sat for a long time with the document that contained the control sample results. 4 emergencies, 4 lost ships, the precise documentation of what the gap between distress signals and response times produced when no one bridged it, and he sat with it until he understood it completely, which took longer than he expected. He presented to the council without editorial comment. He put the data on the display and walked them through it and answered their questions, and did not tell them what to conclude, because the data said what the data said, and the council was capable of reading it. The vote was 39-10 in favor of formal recognition of the Human Emergency Response Network as a cooperative affiliated operation with jurisdictional awareness and operational independence within the parameters the network required. It was not unanimous. The 10 who voted against had legitimate concerns about precedent and authorization frameworks, and the specific complications that arose when a member species operated infrastructure of this scale without prior council approval, and their concerns were noted in the record. And Rourke had read the record and understood the concerns, and agreed to a review process that would address them over the following year. She agreed to the review process from the Bridge of the Unyielding, which was in the Sector 8 void at the time, having responded 14 minutes ago to a distress signal from a Marin research vessel with a collapsed drive system and 38 aboard. The Marin vessel was stable. The boarding assessment was underway. The Unyielding's medical bay was preparing for the crew transfer. The council notification came through on Yoon's console while she was reviewing the boarding team's initial report, and he brought it to her attention, and she read it once, nodded, and handed it back to him. "Good," she said. "That's all," he said. She looked at him. "What else?" He thought about it. "I suppose that covers it," he said. She turned back to the boarding report. Outside the viewport, the stars were what they always were, ancient, permanent, indifferent, crossing the distances between worlds where beings built lives and loved people, and sent signals into the dark when those lives and those people were in danger. Because sending a signal was the thing you did when everything else had run out, the last available act of hope, the final assertion that somewhere in the dark there was something that would hear it and come. Somewhere in the dark, humanity was positioned to hear it. Humanity always answered. In the Sector 7 void, at the coordinates where the eternal dawn had tumbled in the dark with 5 hours and 43 minutes on its life support counter, there was nothing now. The debris of a VRAX holding facility being documented by cooperative forensic teams, the transit signatures of ships that had come and gone, the faint residual energy of 13 human vessels that had appeared and done what they had come to do, and moved on to the next signal. In the galaxy beyond, beings sent signals. Beings who were afraid, who were running out of time, who had tried everything else and found it insufficient, who were down to the last available act, the final assertion, the signal that said simply, "We are here, we are in danger, please come." And in the dark between the stars, patient and positioned and ready, humanity listened. And humanity came. Every time,